afternoon. I'm Suzanne Miller, a principal researcher in the Continuous Deployment of Capability Directorate, and I'm here to talk to you today about a project that Will Hayes, Crisanne Nolan, and several of us have been involved in called the CMU SEI Agile Virtual Schoolhouse. So let's talk about that. So why do we have something going on with Agile? It's not a current area of research for the SEI, but there is a lot of urgency in the DoD to embrace Agile and DevSecOps. If you've looked at things like the Defense Innovation Board, Software Acquisition Practices Report, or if you've looked at the NDAA legislation for the last couple of years, you will see that Agile and DevSecOps are called out explicitly in language that is directing large and small programs to use Agile and Lean methods to deliver capability at the speed of relevance. So to support that, as part of our transition mission, we've developed a virtual training channel that leverages resources and subject matter expertise at the SEI in an online format for both virtual and remote team education. And we kind of got this started just in time to support people in COVID. So we'll talk a little bit about it and about the content, about what led us to this and what kinds of things you can expect if you want to engage with it. So why do we talk about this at a research review? Since this is the actual Agile adoption research, is that period was over in 2016. But the idea is that we still do research to practice and practice to research. Even when we are not actively researching an area, we still provide leadership in education and helping people understand the policy changes that are coming and that are here now. And trying to find low-drag approaches to enable people to access our research content as well as what we are learning in the field. So we allow in this virtual schoolhouse not just communication outward, but discussion inward with people that are in the schoolhouse who are in programs that are actively trying to adopt these kinds of methods. And we learn new things from them. So, for example, how do AI and machine learning play into model-based engineering in my Agile and Lean approach? That's a real question that came up in one of the schoolhouse sessions. And those kinds of questions actually lead us back into the practice to research mode, where we take this back into our research community and say, hey, who's doing something with this? And how can we leverage this so that we can get better results in this area that is more well understood? So we are always looking at ways to evolve and to optimize our transition approach to meet the needs of our DoD communities. Recently, especially with the COVID quarantines that most of our constituents have had to deal with, then we have been looking at this particular method as a way of enabling people to get the education they need and get the discussions that they need going. So the format is using what we call learning packages, and learning packages have two elements. One element is a self-study assignment. So this is where the SEI curates external resources that are available to the public, and they include both videos, which there are a lot of videos in many subjects now. And so one of the problems that we hear from people out in the DoD community is which of these are relevant to me? Because, talking to me about Agile for, building a website is not going to help me if I'm trying to build an airplane. And so we do that curation so that we get things that are relevant, especially to the DoD, and ask people to look at those things before they come into the session. And then the live virtual class is the second part. And we have one or more, depending on the topic, SEI subject matter experts that give a 2-hour online lecture and facilitate group discussion throughout that. This live interaction has proved to be very rich in exploring the subject matter, both from what they did in self-study and also in interacting with what we're saying as we deliver the lectures. So this combination of self-study and live has turned out to be pretty powerful in getting people to understand the concepts of different aspects of Agile in government, as well as to help them to talk to each other about these concepts and how they apply in their setting. We've gotten really positive feedback from this. Pretty much, we've done some, after action sort of surveys and retrospectives. These are some of the quotes. And the thing that makes me happy is that this one on the bottom right, the speakers had a very good understanding of the topic, could back up the academics with real world examples, which is rare. And that's really what we were hoping to be able to provide is, yeah, we've got all the academic knowledge about Agile and why it works and all those good things, but how to make it real in the DoD programs that we work with. And the examples that we have from the last 10 years are a very rich source of discussion. And so that's been very positive. So that's really what we're trying to do. Just a little bit about the learning package in terms of the self-study. As I said, this is curated. We've got sort of descriptions, links to all of the things. And we do mix sort of foundational publications, things that are, what we would call the classics related to some topic in Agile, but also new thinking. So one of the things that we had in our Agile and Systems Engineering is a link to a video on an activity called WikiSpeed, where there's a group that is actually applying lean and agile concepts in a very kind of extreme version for building a car, a performance kind of race car. And in that video, they talk about, rebuilding the entire car every 7 days. So that's not foundational thinking when it comes to how we think about Agile and lean, but it is kind of giving people some different ideas of how to apply Agile in hardware settings. And even though that's not necessarily the focus of SEI research, we live in a world where the hardware and the software have to work together. So having people be aware of what's going on in the hardware world is also really beneficial. The other aspect that we try and go for with this learning package on the self-study side is bite-sized study flexibility. So we try and keep none of the videos are longer than an hour, and the readings shouldn't take you, more than an hour, so that you can decide how you want to group your learning time. The second thing is the live virtual class. And here is an example of actually me, as it turns out, giving a lecture sort of on the side. And you can see there's a slide up there on some sort of, Agile topic. But then the more important part is the chat area. And most of your, we were using Skype in this particular instance, but pretty much all of your venues for online platforms have some kind of chat function. And we really encourage this chat discussion, both with the instructor and among each other, among the participants. That has turned out to be really, really an exciting way to get, I know it doesn't sound like chat is exciting, but we get people that, make provocative statements in chat, and the instructors can engage with that and other people engage with that. And we always leave room at the end of the session where the instructors will stay after, and we'll have an after session where they can talk to us about particular things that came up in the chat or that they didn't want to talk about, and when there's 30 other people on the call. But this facility to have discussion as well as lecture turns out to be one of the really valuable aspects of this for the people that have engaged with us. We also have been taking advantage of live polling kinds of software. A lot of this software has become available in recent times, and they do different kinds of things. And here's a case where we, ask people to complete this sentence, disciplined approaches to cadence enable. And then the polling software actually creates real-time the word cloud. Actually, this is our most popular type of poll. We can do multiple choice polls and other kinds as well, but everybody we have to do at least one word cloud every time because everybody loves to see the word cloud come up. So this gives the instructors a chance to see, are we getting the message across? So some of the polls are like this, where we're trying to say, are we getting the messages across here? Are the dominant things coming out of this the sort of things that we would expect? And also in some cases, it gives us a chance to get perception kinds of information. Some of the polls have to do with what the perception is of the utility of certain practices in DoD and things like that. So we have a wide range of ways that we use these polling questions. but they give us both feedback on the learning and how the learning is going in the session, as well as feedback about the student perceptions of this topic that we're talking about in any one of these individual sessions. So what content are we using? Are we leveraging for this? This is not the entire curriculum, but the things that we try to focus on are the things that are DoD specific. So this first one, Agile in the DoD landscape, is really all about what is going on in the legal, legislative landscape, the policy landscape, practices, what's happening in the DoD. If you don't have your own way of capturing that information, we're curating for you what are some of the latest things that are going on. So if you've heard of adaptive acquisition pathways and how those relate to Agile, we talk about that. We talk about the DIB swap. So that's the type of topics that we try to focus on. We do have some foundational areas. The Agile and Lean Principles Deep Dive is a chance for us to have a more in-depth discussion about how do these principles apply in different aspects of DoD acquisition. And that is usually a very rich discussion when we do that module. Oversight versus insight is one. That is actually one that we have done a public webinar on, and that will be available. The link to that will be available in the transcript for this. But the idea that we have both oversight and with Agile, we're really trying to go for insight. How do we accomplish that when we are transitioning from traditional to Agile settings is a very popular one. Agile and requirements. Anybody that knows anything about Agile knows that we have large-scale system of systems, especially have a lot of different requirement types that we have to deal with. And how do we translate that into Agile speak and into the ways that Agile teams tend to use and work with requirements? And then, of course, Agile and testing. How do we take what we are able to do with Agile and leverage that to actually enable some of the shift left testing that is now part of the Air Force policy, at least, and is something that's being pursued in other settings as well. This is not all of the topics, but just a sampling of some of the topics to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we would talk about in these 2-hour sessions and that are supported by the learning packages. So one of the things, if you're going to do something like this yourself, or even this is one of the things that we tell people when they join a class, we have to remind people that we are doing Distro A only. We have not yet run one of these courses in a venue where we have access to platforms that allow CUI. And so we watch for that, and you need to make sure you remind people to not have inappropriate conversations. One of the things that you need to do to be able to do this successfully is have instructors that don't just know the academic, but they know the domain. They know stories that go what we call beyond what's on the slide. And we are always balancing the sort of lecture pieces with seeking evidence of engagement. This has turned out to be a balancing act, right? Too much of is anyone listening is annoying to people. Too little engenders attention dropping. And so for those of you familiar, there's a Grow facilitation model that we use to kind of tune how we are acting real time, as well as when we design these modules. How do we get people's attention and orient them to the purpose? How do we keep the energy going? The chat function turns out to be one of the ways to connect people. The information aspect in terms of making sure that the information is that which is needed for the students that are attending, and then getting closure and sort of commitment to kind of move forward with the information in their setting. That changes depending on what kind of an audience we have. We have had run this in some programs where we have kind of an integral work group, and they actually have assignments in terms of applying what they've learned in the virtual schoolhouse afterwards. And we've had other more general settings where it's really just an awareness. So you need to know what is the goal as you go after that. Some keys to success that we found in doing this kind of a transition mechanism, that opportunity for real-time discussion of the real-world context turns out to be probably the thing that makes people come back over and over again. getting the latest insights into this landscape. Even though the research, sort of portion of our work with this is completed, we still keep up with this area very actively in terms of what's going on in terms of policy and guidance. And so we curate that to make it accessible to people. We are focused on very highly regulated environments and complex cyber-physical systems. And that's a gap in most of the commercial and other kinds of content. It's hard to find Agile in those settings, and you have to find content that's related to those particular settings in government. It's a lot easier to find, Agile in government that's related more to federal kind of information systems. We can adapt this cadence of delivery to workplace schedules. One of the things that we did is we adapted our time frame, because in one particular area we had international partners that wanted to participate, and so they were 5 hours ahead in Europe, and so we adjusted our time frame so that they would be able to participate. This multimodal learning, the idea of self-serve combined with online lecture, it really supports the kind of virtual work practices that are being recommended as we do more and more of the virtual work. And we can really deal with a large virtual audience. So from some of our settings we've had as many as 100 people in one of these virtual schoolhouse offerings. And, that's larger than we can accommodate if we were doing this live in person, to be very honest. So there's some aspects of this that are actually very cost effective. And especially, we will probably, even after quarantine regulations are lifted, there will probably still be places where I've got people in Europe, I've got people on the West Coast, I've got people, all over the country, and I'd like them all to be in the same venue, and I don't really have the money for them to travel. So, this provides a cost-effective way to work and so that we can get the education and the discussion that's needed. So that's really, I want to let you know who our team members are. Will Hayes, who's the lead for our Agile Acquisition Transformation Group. Myself and Crisanne Nolan are the three people that you would want to contact if you are interested in either using the virtual schoolhouse for your own activities, or if you're interested in having custom material generated for your setting. We're the ones to talk to about that. So I do want to thank all of you for your attention, and we'll open it now. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our live Q&A session for our virtual schoolhouse presentation that you've just watched. And with me today, I have two of the colleagues that you see on the slide of the team members, Will Hayes and Crisanne Nolan. Will and I are on the sort of customer virtual design end of the spectrum. Crisanne is also getting into that piece, and as well, she is the one that makes all this stuff work. So she's involved in a lot of the operations that go into making this virtual schoolhouse that we've just described something that actually works well for our customers. So I want to welcome both of you. Thank you. And I'm actually going to turn this over to Crisanne for the questions and answers, because she's probably got a few that we haven't teed up yet. And she's going to also give us questions from the audience. So Crisanne, take it away.
Thank you, Susie. Our first question is from the audience. Do you have recommendations on how to transition from Waterfall to Agile when working with a team that is accustomed to Waterfall?
Yes. Do we have recommendations? We have just a few. And so honestly, our whole body of written work really addresses a lot of that question. We started writing about the adoption barriers to Agile in government settings, which are primarily waterfall settings, starting in 2010. And we've got things out in the world about that. One of the things that we recommend initially is to do what we call a readiness and fit analysis. And the idea of that is not so much to talk about, do you do these practices or those practices, but it's more about what are the things about your culture, your environment, your ecosystem that actually already support going to Agile that you may not be aware of? And what are some of the things that are going to give you problems? That you have mindsets and you have some practices and ways of doing things that we know are problematic when you try and make that transition. So the first step in my mind is to go in with your eyes open and to figure out where do you already have some compatibility with an Agile mindset and where are you going to have, where are there going to be known issues? And the second recommendation is to talk to people that have done it. 10 years ago, I could not make this recommendation. But today, there are people, if you attended the presentation that Forrest Schul, the panel that he hosted earlier, talked about these 873 and 874 pilots. Those are DoD pilots transitioning large and small programs. And so, talk to people that have done it and find out what their big successes were. And especially if you can find people that are more like you, because how you transition people that are building a payroll system from Waterfall to Agile, how you transition people that are doing an airplane from Waterfall to Agile aren't going to be all the same thing. So you want to find people that have your context. To support that, one of the other things that we do at the SEI is we sponsor an Agile collaboration group. And Crisanne Nolan, if you email Crisanne, she will get you the paperwork to join that if you want. It's basically an NDA. If you're commercial, it's just an email acknowledgement to sign if you're government staff. And we meet once a month, and we have presenters that talk to us about their experiences, different things that they've done. And it's all focused on DoD, federal, kinds of settings. And a lot of it is about that transition from Waterfall to Agile. So, and in terms of things like, are there a list of the pilots? In the transcript, we'll make sure that there's a community of practice website for the 873 and 874 pilots, and that's where you can find out what all the pilots are. There is a list, and you could probably also do info at SEI and direct it to Dr. Forrest Schul, because he's been working directly with those. So, Patty, I hope that helps you with that question. All right, so I think got that one. What else?
Great. Thank you, Suze.
Will gets the next one.
Will,
okay.
You're up. What are the transitions between the frameworks on mixed framework applications?
Yeah, so one of the challenges we have is, frankly, the proliferation of so many well-intentioned commercial frameworks, and often we mistake the orthodoxy around the language, the particular terminology, the specifications of a role or responsibility as articulated in one framework or another. Somehow that structure is mistaken for the value proposition that the authors of the framework actually intended. And so we get caught into traps about certifications for specific methodologies as opposed to the values and principles those methodologies are intended to reinforce. And so it's really important that you have your own rudder as you navigate these seas, because if you don't have a clear understanding of what the value proposition is for the results you're going for, then clinging to the methodologies and the specific terminology becomes the visible sign that you're doing something different. And that really isn't as productive as finding a way to exploit those ideas toward the fulfillment of the mission you've always been on. And finding that connection, the readiness and fit analysis that Suze just mentioned, allows you to kind of assess where are our strengths, where are our greater risks, and then this method that we're looking at considering, what is its profile of strengths and risks, and how does that match up for us? And navigating through these great offerings that are coming from frameworks and methodologies out there is much easier and much more profitable to you as opposed to the consultant as you go through that. And that's one of the principles that really drives our choices in the virtual schoolhouse. We really want to be responsive to the situation you're in, as opposed to saying, here's a way for us to teach you a method that you can somehow install in your organization. That sort of approach really doesn't tend to work out very well. Over.
And I want to add one thing to that, Will, which I know you'll agree with, which is whenever you're looking at multiple frameworks, whether they're technical frameworks or practice frameworks, look at, from your viewpoint, how do they express the Agile and Lean principles that are most important to you. So there's a set of 12 Agile principles. There's a set of 9 typically Lean principles that many of us use. And, everybody's got their ones that are the most important to their organization. And evaluating frameworks against the principles that are of most importance is a good way to say, maybe this one is going to work better for us than that one. And if you're in a setting where you are required to use a mix of frameworks, then look at what are the risks, because this framework emphasizes these principles more, but we really care more about those principles. So that's a couple of things that I might add to that. So, all right, what do you got for us next, Crisanne?
Great. A common question that we receive about the Agile Virtual Schoolhouse is, how is this training different when it's not in a classroom? Can you guys speak a little bit to what happens in the Agile Virtual Schoolhouse that might not happen in the regular training room?
I'm going to take one part of that and then I'll turn it over to Will. We haven't figured out how to get the games we love to play in the class that everybody loves to translate to virtual. So I'm sorry, you're not going to get our Whose Line Is It Anyway game, if you go to Virtual Schoolhouse. But we're still working on how do we get that in there. All right, but I'll let Will talk about some of the other differences.
So as we looked at this opportunity that presented itself, believe it or not, we view quarantine as an opportunity because the desire to get a whole lot of people in a conference room together for more than a day to address a particular topic, that's not a luxury a lot of programs have. So now that we have an opportunity to reach them in their living rooms or their studies at home, it really changes the dynamic in terms of whether or not a training offering can reach people. Having said that, the people on our team, if you know any of them, they really tend to thrive in interactive settings. And so as we looked at going online for training and we don't have a classroom full of faces that are giving us the feedback of, yeah, that made it across, or gee, you might need to explain that point a little bit more, or these 3 people over in the corner are having a conversation about the thing we were just talking about. Perhaps we're not finished addressing that. Without that feedback, we were very concerned that our effectiveness would really be diminished. And we think very carefully about what we aspire to accomplish with training. We're not going to turn you into a brain surgeon, no matter how many days of training we do with PowerPoint. That's just not a skill that can be imparted through that mechanism. But at the same time, if all we do is teach you the terminology and the structures of commercial frameworks, as we said in our previous question, we really wouldn't be serving you well. So finding ways for us to be much more impactful in terms of reaching the students and understanding their needs, while also amassing a set of information that we know will serve them. In this kind of dynamic online forum, we found some really nice advantages in that we could have more than one instructor for a much lower cost than we would if we were doing things in person. If we have to send 6 people to your site to deliver training for 2 days, that's not a value proposition most organizations are really going to find attractive. However, if we have this arrangement where there are self-paced activities where you set the pace and you set the timing for it, and a relatively small proportion of the overall time is consumed by in-person interaction, then we can have 5 or 6 instructors, a team of instructors on our side, carrying on a lively chat with folks who are in the audience, who are trying to ask a question that may be specific to them. They don't care to disrupt the flow of the whole course in order to get their point across. As soon as people start to see that that channel exists, we've had some situations where the chat stream that's happening parallel to the conversation that goes against the visual images was just as lively. And it really gave the instructors who are accustomed to that dynamic situation where we're sensing whether or not our audience is getting the point or accepting the hypothesis that we're putting forward. These other avenues for getting feedback and for pushing information out really turned out to be an advantageous situation by comparison. There are things we can do in virtual that we couldn't do in person. And as we think about how this experience is shaping our offerings, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way we used to do things. We're always going to have some element of this kind of vehicle that gives us a much more diverse channel and an ability to really make more things available to people. Suze, can you riff on what I've just said?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would add to that is we're still learning about how to take best advantage of this. So, we aren't doing yet things like simulations, on virtual in the virtual schoolhouse, but we have some ideas about how to go about doing that. We haven't figured out how to do whose line is it anyway, but we're going to try and, that we have run into some kinds of quiz game, kinds of things that are out there. And some of it has to do with the fact that the response of industry to COVID, quarantine, Zoom meetings, Zoom classes has actually generated a lot of innovation in these areas. And so I've basically gotten into the habit of looking kind of every week at what's out there now because, and I annoy people with it. I know it's like, hey, can we have this? And not all of them are secure. So, be careful about that. But, but we do look at what are the things that we can bring into the schoolhouse to make it as engaging as possible. Because whether you're in a classroom setting or you're in a virtual setting, what we're really after is engagement. We want to engage your mind. We want you to be we want you to be present and feel like you're contributing to the conversation as you're learning. And we can't do that if we don't have your attention. And so part of what we have to do is figure out how to keep your attention. So we're evolving our own approaches as we go along and trying to make this something that everybody wants to do after quarantine is lifted. Over.
Great. Thank you, Susie. Another question. What other topics do you anticipate incorporating into the virtual schoolhouse?
You want to start that one, Will?
Yeah, so we are able to pretty readily customize from our very large collection of instructional material that we've had. And so we are slowly evolving as things like value stream mapping, the importance of different fields of engineering come into play as we talk about how do we do lean and agile approaches where we have, a confluence of a lot of different kinds of engineering thinking going in. Let me start it with that and go ahead, Suze.
Yeah, so we've had requests for things like something specific to sustainment and how you would apply agile methods in sustainment. Certainly, one we've had requests, we're working on this one, but it's a tough one to crack regardless of the venue, is agile and certification. And what are the things that are evolving in terms of the certification community moving and shifting to the left. Also, configuration management. One topic that was requested was Agile and risk management. So how do we, even though we talk about how Agile kind of is risk management in some ways, how do we integrate some of the things that we do in Agile with the more traditional risk management approaches? Hardware engineering, Agile and hardware engineering, that's going to be more than one module, I can tell you that, is one of the areas. And then we've also, some of the simulation ideas come up from the idea of doing more targeted role-based kinds of trainings. What is it like to be a product manager? What is it like to be a system architect? Some of those kinds of topics are things that we're also starting to work through. And so there's, and I'm sure as I've talked about this, we'll thought of some others that we should probably be addressing. But this is kind of it's a backlog, right? We're trying to do our own Agile thing. We have a backlog. And I will be honest with you, what brings something to the surface is actually a customer setting that is interested in supporting us doing the development work that's needed to get that out to their constituency. And we'll go ahead and take it over from there.
Yeah, so as we encounter customers with various levels of expertise, and we encounter customers that have really squared away some of the introductory material, and they're pretty comfortable that they understand what it looks like to do things well, we get the opportunity to explore things like how do we refine our approach to prioritization? How do we start to introduce different voices in the stakeholder community, because the basic, entry level off the shelf explanation of how do you prioritize epics or features or stories, they don't necessarily have all of the stakeholders that we have in our milieu. And so there are members of our team who are working on aspects of evolution for those approaches that we now have a mature audience to start to talk about. Things like user-centered design, things like how do we really take a multi-classification, multi-nationality, multi-time zone, cloud-based development environment and make that work for a hardware-intensive cyber-physical system without the kind of maturation we're seeing in the community. These topics aren't really amenable to this kind of forum. But now that we have people 20 or 30 at a time that can have an informed opinion on that, the conversation we can have in this venue is really, really exciting and something I look forward to seeing grow.
I don't think that last one we're going to be able to do in 1 2-hour session, though, just saying.
No, probably not.
Probably not. All right. I think at this point, it's time for us to close out this session. I want to thank Crisanne and Will. I especially want to thank Will for tolerating some of those. Can I please have this tool to play with and try things? Because he's the one that has to actually look at our stakeholders within the SEI. And sometimes I don't get everything I want, but it's all right. But I get what I need. So, right, back to the stones. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Those of you that gave us questions, that's always makes us think that there are people that are actually watching what we're doing. And we love that engagement too, as you can tell from how I use my hands. So thank you very, very much and have a wonderful weekend. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the review.